Welcome to another edition of SRI Shorts. I'm David Dayton, and today I'm just going to talk a little bit about the soft power of China and the difficulties and advantages of China. And what I'd like to do is I just like to combine a couple of ideas in how they relate to business and how these concepts, whether China's growing or whether China's slowing down, whether China's a technological paradise or whether it's very difficult for foreigners, and how much influence that has on the world and the business concepts or the concept of doing business in China today. So let's just look at a couple of different things. First of all, I've been reading a lot of articles about, of course, as everybody has, the slowdown of China, the slowdown of the Chinese economy. And while there's still some bright spots and there's still some things that are ticking up or showing trends in the right direction, at least, like that there's a long-term recovery that's possible for China, there's no doubt that things have changed in the last 5 years or even in the last 10 years as opposed to the previous decade in China. And so we have to understand that going and doing business in China today is very different. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's difficult, but it's certainly different than it was before. A, the technology is better. B, the economy is worse. C, the infrastructure is still there and oftentimes getting better for businesses to do business there. But D, the international exposure of Chinese businesses and Chinese individuals has decreased. And so when you go to China, I think the real best way to understand what's happening around you is to not look at it in a black and white, and maybe not even in shades of gray, but recognize that China is a series of contradictions. That at the same time that there is advanced technology that China is leading the world in, maybe in different types of robotic delivery systems or in electric cars or different types of manufacturing, China is still behind in a lot of other things, particularly in terms of globalization. I like to phrase it like this, that China is international, but it's not global, meaning, or you phrase it the other way around, China is global, but not international. Either way, the concept is that China affects the world, and there are Chinese everywhere in the world. But when you go to China, you realize how insular it is and how non-international it really is. And yeah, there are lots of foreign brands there for sure. But for the majority of Chinese, it is a very domesticated, a very localized experience living in China. And when you go there as a foreigner and you're instantly cut off from the digital media that you're used to outside, or you have difficulties communicating with the home office because of whatever types of infrastructure you're limited to in China, or you're having to deal completely with Chinese staff and Chinese suppliers and Chinese regulators, all of a sudden you recognize that it's a different world. And it very much is isolated. And this was kind of highlighted to me. I've read a post on LinkedIn that was talking about some English phrases that you could drop in. I totally agree. It's an awesome way to communicate, and to oftentimes your staff wants to use language that they've picked up, that they've learned, phrases from movies, from songs, from other types of social media that maybe they have seen. And so they're going to drop those words or phrases in English into their Chinese conversations with you or with others. And if you can do the same and you can respond using what's known to them, it can be a really effective way to communicate a little bit better and maybe have to go from being co-workers to friends, because your language allows you to have that personalized experience. But the joke that I made was that you're not going to see that in Chinese blog posts about, hey, these are some Chinese words that you can drop into your English conversations with foreigners. China just doesn't have that soft power. It's still very localized. It's still very limited. Another example of that is the reality that while China is begging for foreigners to come, they're looking for foreign investment, they're looking for foreign teachers, they're looking for foreign professionals, and a number of different things. And anybody that has a business in China recognizes that at a certain level that they do not need foreign managers, but then again at a certain higher level of international business, there is a demand for people with international experience that China does not have. And at the same time that China is looking for those people and trying to engage with the world and trying to show the world that they are indeed a destination, right, for international business and a champion of globalization in this world of isolation and decoupling, they're pulling English off of street signs. It's difficult to navigate China if you don't speak Mandarin. There's just no other way to put that. You can have a great attitude. You can have a fantastic support system. You can have wonderful people who translate for you and interpret for you on a regular basis. But as soon as you're left on your own, particularly if you're outside of the professional or a university environment, you're going to probably, most likely, have difficulties. If you're bringing a family with you to China, it becomes very difficult for individuals in the family outside of an educational arena or a professional business space to be able to navigate China on their own. Now, lots of tourists go to China every year and have a fantastic experience. I know I've encouraged a number of family and friends over the years to, hey, just go and you'll find nice people and they'll help you out. And that's the reality. But for a 7, 10, 14-day vacation, being dependent upon friends or nice people on the street or the concierge or whomever to help you out, that's not a problem. But when it turns into your job, when it turns into a long-term professional experience, months, years even, that level of dependence upon other people becomes really pretty difficult. And so China's having this conflicting, this contradictory experiences of, hey, we want to be global, but at the same time, we want to be Chinese. We want to have China for the Chinese. And that's a lot of what their decoupling, which started before the Western decoupling, is all about, right? It's this national idea, both in terms of security and national pride and culture and whatnot, where they have the desire to make China for the Chinese. And that tends to make their invitations to foreigners to come and work and do business in China fall a little bit flat. And when foreigners do go there excited and willing to work, you have to have a real strong sense of optimism and flexibility to be able to manage in a culture that oftentimes, while friendly, isn't necessarily welcoming. And in a logistical environment that, while convenient and advanced, isn't necessarily easy to get around or easy to function in if you don't have all of the right language and electronics, apps, tools to function in that area. And so these are just a couple of ideas that I thought were really interesting that affect how people do business. Now, you're looking at a number of the geopolitical news issues about, say, VW in Western China or other companies that reports that say manufacturers and businesses are leaving China, or they're not growing their presence in China, or maybe they're staying the same in China. And, how do we interpret this? How do we understand this? The reality is that China is a huge market. Most people are going to need to be there. If you are already in China, you're already grounded in China, you're based there, probably a bunch of your manufacturing is still there. Maybe your market, maybe it's one of your largest markets for products that you sell is in China. And to that end, China's not going anywhere for you, and you have to learn how to manage these types of things. You've got to stay there. And so I think a lot of businesses are going to be staying in China. The reality is that foreign individuals are leaving China, but necessarily foreign businesses necessarily are not leaving China at the same rate that the foreign individuals are. And we have got to figure out how we are going to manage collectively, right, as internationally, as cultures and countries and people, but also individuals and individual companies. We've got to figure out how we are going to be able to navigate the interpersonal and communication across culture relationships that are necessary to keep these businesses running effectively as geopolitical storms arise, and they're definitely going to be rising. These next few years are going to be very different, if not difficult, more difficult for the United States and China. Hopefully deals can be made. We'll see if there's an art to that, and we'll see if that enhances the relationships. But there are issues that some countries have said, this is a red line. You cross this red line and there's no coming back, or you don't cross this red line or there will be consequences. And multiple countries have started to lay down laws and say, hey, these types of things are unacceptable, and there seems to be little room to negotiate. But I really strongly believe, and I lived in China for more than a dozen years. And I lived in Taiwan for a few years as well. And I lived in Thailand and worked with the Chinese community there for a number of years as well. More than 20 years in Asia. I really honestly believe that communications at the personal level, though while difficult and oftentimes not necessarily coming to the resolution that you would hope, are the best way to resolve the conflicts both internally and times inside of an organization and interpersonally, right? Externally, outside of the organization on a human-to-human level. We've got to be able to have those exchanges. A side note on this: I was working at a university. I was doing some research on the numbers, and I recognized or found a stat that said that there are almost 300,000 Chinese students studying in the United States. There are less than 15,000, there are less than 1,500 American students studying in China. We are not even making an attempt to understand China or to deal with China. I think that we have decided that our business and our economy and our preeminence in the world trumps our necessity to understand others more deeply, more concretely, more fully. And to that end, I think we're losing out on both business opportunities and personal relationships that could enhance the international relationships. Anyway, so contradictions. I really think that that's how you have to understand China. There's going to be A and there's going to be B, and they're both going to exist at the same time. And you have to just recognize that I've got to deal with multiple conflicting ideas at the same time, and that's the best way to understand China. And I think that as we recognize that China is its own beast and it's big. As a friend once said to me, you're going to come to China with the idea that you're going to change how things are done, and China is going to change your perspective and change how you get things done. I think that's really the reality. We can go to China, we can have our mission, vision, values, we can establish them, we can create a change capable, a flexible culture inside an organization in China. That's true. But we are not going to change China. And China's probably going to rough around, sand off, smooth off the rough edges of our mission, vision, values that was created in a more static, more stable foreign environment as we move that culture into a more flexible and fast-paced environment that is China. And we're going to have to recognize that the corners have got to be smooth, and we have to be a little bit more flexible. We can stay true to our core principles, but a lot of things that we thought were core principles, we recognize are extensions of a culture that is our own, that we can replicate and we can adjust and be flexible within China and still keep our core principles and values. Anyway, those are my thoughts and ideas on soft power, on doing business in China, on China's influence, and the contradiction that is China. I love China. I really think that there's potential for the world to cooperate with China if both sides make some concessions as to how we understand and how we work moving forward. But the idea that we're not going to be working together moving forward in the world, or that it's going to be two different spheres completely cut off from each other, a Chinese world and a US world, I think denies the realities of the global interconnectedness of business and the desire for individuals to connect, to contact, and to associate with one another. So anyway, hopefully that is maybe a little bit inspirational, maybe a little bit aspirational, but also a little bit practical, right? We have to understand when we go to China the difficulties that are going to be there, despite the technological advances and all of the other good news, and that there's going to be some fantastic things that happen despite all of the bad news and the censorship and the other things that we hear about as well. Anyway, for SRI Shorts, I'm David Dayton. If you'd like to know more about how SRI can help you understand Asia and doing business in Asia, feel free to reach out and contact me anytime. Thanks.